First, we would really like to thank you because it's a great honor for us. And all of us are part of the Institute of the National Institute of Oriental Studies, and all the students are studying Indian language and civilization, so for them it's a huge opportunity to meet you. The first question are about what you said this morning, and Anita has a question.
This morning you draw a parallel between modern India and Godmother. But don't you feel that in both of them there is the same Shakti elements?
Shakti?
Yeah.
Yes, most certainly, of course.
Even if you're told that there is a difference of, in modern India modern India is pure, and in Godmother is a difference?
Both of them have elemental characteristics which comes from the concept of Shakti. Most certainly, yes, there are tremendous similarities between the two.
One is a Bharat Mata and the other one is a...
Devi or Ishwar Mata.
So they are the same, but they are not the same. This is what you mean. Okay. Papa Dharma?
Yes, in Godmother, yesterday's film, yesterday we have seen it, I mean, you speak with great insight of the Ramayana, saying that the role, the character of Sita is essential in it. And as an anthropologist, I know quite well that there are many popular versions of the Ramayana where Sita is absolutely the main character. And if Ravan was not seduced by Sita, he would have never have been vanquished. So that is really a very deep view and popular view of Ramayana. Now I want to ask you another question of Hindu way of thinking, if I might say. Is that I was in my study, I met the notion of dharma of necessity, or dharma of distress, and it is named aborde in the village. And in the name of that, you can do many things which are forbidden by the rules of Hinduism. For instance, when a Brahman is dying thirsty in a desert, if there is a well with an untouchable on the well, he can drink the water by the hand of the untouchable just as a matter of survival. Then when I saw fire, that was last July, I was very much struck that it is a question of aborde also for these two women to have the relations they have, because they have to break the rule because it is compulsory for them to do so. It's a question of survival.
I'm very glad that you interpret it like that. But in my view, fire was many things. You know, it's touted largely as a film about same-sex love, but in fact it's very much more than that. And I think that the reason it upset people, because it questions the patriarchal notions of family. It questions a suppression of desire, basically. And I think it can upset the status quo if women got up and started saying that it's good to feel desire. And in fact, desire is something that is acceptable, respectable, and something that is needed, and that can shift balances, and I think that's why it creates. But I think, again, I would reiterate that fire, what it essentially is saying, which to me is very important, is that when we come across people who make choices which are different from ours, rather than condemn them, we must try and empathize with them. Not just tolerate, but empathize, which is a different thing from merely tolerating. Because if we can empathize with the two women in fire, then maybe we can empathize with the other religion, the other gender, the other race, the other nation. And that is the most important thing that I think Fire is trying to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I had a question. As an exterior vision, you know, the title, Godmother, made me think of a feminist version of The Godfather. And you, who has really been in the film, the main character, how did you live that, or is it, I mean, how did you feel it according to that?
Well, firstly, it had for me many challenges. One, the basic challenge was the acting challenge, because I was told by the filmmaker that this is a film within the mainstream cinema, and that it's very important that I understand that the film should be played within the realism of, let's say, Ganga Jamna, rather than a Sham Benegal film like Manthan, or even my own films. And so the brief was very clear that it had to be a larger-than-life, mainstream, you know, melodramatic within that whole thing, and yet make it believable and credible. So that was a real challenge in terms of the acting patterns that I had to adopt. The language, if you've noticed, is a difficult dialect. So in order to internalize that language, it was challenged. The fact that I had to learn dance, etc. But see, for actors, it's very easy to do parts which are noble and good and make you feel like a hero. Actors love doing that, because you have to, finally in acting, you have to look at the resources from within you. And it's nice to come out with all the good emotions. It's when you're playing the not so good parts that you have a problem. And for instance, the scene where she gets her husband's killer killed in broad daylight, and she says, kill him, so that he has blood spurting out of his mouth. Now that's a very violent, very cruel thing to say. And in order to make that sound not fake but real, the actor has to sort of look within her own resources to find that. And you know, acting is not just about pulling out an emotion at the click of a button. You say, all right, emotion number 59, come out when I want you, and then it doesn't go right back. It can be very violent and very disturbing, because you've churned it from inside yourself. And then what you do with this violence that you've unleashed? I mean, you can use it for the part, but it still takes some time for it to simmer. And it can be very disturbing, very, very disturbing. So it's in those bits where she's being completely calculated, completely cold. I mean, she gets that man killed and then turns up at his funeral with this completely innocent look on her face, and very violent to do. All those bits were very disturbing for me to do, but yet very challenging as an actor, because it forces me to explore areas hitherto unknown even to myself. And I discover through playing Rambhi that Shabana is capable of being cold, manipulative, horrible, and so it makes me discover things about myself which are not comfortable to see otherwise. But that's the whole challenge and the interesting part of acting. That's why I enjoy it.
And do you feel that you can only see that through the cinema, or also through theater? Can be possible?
No, of course through theater as well, because acting is basically the same thing. When you go out in search of a character, and when you form a part, then the processes that you unleash in discovering are the same, but it's like really just adapting to another medium.
My question is, during the film you often repeat Bala Maza ka kel Rajniti.
Yes.
What do you think of this sentence in the reality and as a member of the parliament?
What it actually means, bada maje ki cheez hai ye Rajneet bhi, actually means that this whole political game is a very interesting one. And in real life, it's a bit of both. It is a game to a great extent because of constraints that people who are involved with party politics. You see, what happens is that when you're in party politics, then you have to toe the party line. And so you might want to give issue-based support to a particular issue. But because you belong to a particular party, then you have to take the role of the opposition, which means necessarily to oppose something, even if it seems good. And there are certain constraints on you because of party politics, like that. But the fact is that in a country like India, democracy is really about negotiating spaces for groups with varying interests. It could be anything. It could be, I could be a fundamentalist, spewing forth hate. But in a democracy, I have a right to express myself as long as I don't break rules and I don't indulge in violence, yes? And you might be speaking the language of liberalism, of tolerance, of secularism. And actually, you have the same right as me. But it is about allowing spaces in a way and allowing debate, and sane debate, mind you. It's extremely important about sane debate happening, center stage. So you see which group gets a chance to express herself more. Within that, there are whole lots of manipulations and a whole lot of complexities that go into it, and which is why it makes it a game maybe worth playing, dangerous, but interesting and challenging.
You're extremely well known here as an actress, but very recently we heard a lot about you because of Fire last year, and then because of Water. It was in all our newspaper. The media are giving an image of those two Dipamita's film as very simplistic image, and that the media are using those two films, which are really questioning the Indian civilization or the Indian culture in a very simplistic way, just to have a scandal here. So that was a film.
No, you know, even the media is not a monolith.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, India is not a monolith, and there are various strains of expression, including the media. A lot of the media, in fact, was overwhelmingly supportive. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when the Shiv Sena decided to demonstrate violently against the film, very clearly the media was on the side of the filmmakers, very, very clearly. But I think what happens is too many things grab the media's attention constantly. And so they pick up something because it has the, well, sensational appeal, if you wish. And then because it isn't taken down through the end, it can give the impression that that's the only angle it's pandering to. For instance, what I find worrying about the media today in India, but firstly I must say that I value the fact that there is freedom for the media in India, and that's very, very important, because in a democracy, a free press is really one of the main instruments that we must have. And in India, you have a free press, definitely. So I appreciate that. But this kind of tendency to get a quick bite, in that, when a dog bites a man, they say it doesn't make news, but when a man bites a dog, it makes news. And so you're looking at that all the time. The media tends to do that. And so any group, small group that says something which is intolerant, that immediately gets front page publicity without ever checking that, is this man who is making this intolerant statement, is this group that is talking about intolerance, do they have any credibility? Do they actually exist? How many members are there? is it worthwhile to put their opinion on the front page? But without checking any of that, the minute they say something which is intolerant, it immediately gets center stage coverage. Now, a whole lot of people are saying very sane things, and they are never covered. And if they are covered, it's like somewhere in the back pages. It's this particular aspect of the media that I think needs to be re-examined. But having said that, I think the media in India has been overwhelmingly in support of tolerance and in support of secularism, I would imagine.
Part of the press, not all the press, was not advocating a, let's say, Hindutva or, an ideology.
No. Or one section was merely repeating what the right-wing people were saying. But if you saw all the editorials, the editorials were very, very firmly on the side of freedom of expression, on this right of the artist to creativity, on the ability to say, all the editorials. But they were, of course, reporting what people were saying, some of which was very, very right-wing. But overwhelmingly, if you look at the press post-water, it's really been about this whole question of, why are they saying you shouldn't show the plight of women in the 1930s, because, women, widows in India, even today, have to suffer a lot of deprivation and a lot of discrimination. And in fact, it's interesting that what water has done, even without being made, is it has focused attention on the plight of widows in India, which so far hasn't been anybody's concern at all. In fact, there is a report by the government of UP on the sad plight of the widows, and what water has done is made activists turn up and say, make that report public, because that report would then show how widows have to face deprivation and adopt all kinds of survival strategies.
Thank you.
मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूँगी कि वाटर फिल्म का जो टाइटल है वाटर, तो इसमें हिंदी में दो शब्द हैं, जल और पानी। जल काम में लेते हैं जैसे गंगा जल, पवित्र जल। पानी आम लैंग्वेज में लेते हैं, और पानी भी बहुत काउंट करता है, क्योंकि जाति प्रथा में कुछ जातियों का छुआ पानी नहीं पीते। जब किसी को जाति से बाहर निकालते हैं तो सेम जाति के होने पर भी अपने कुएं का पानी उसको नहीं लेने देते। मरते समय पानी देते हैं, मरने के बाद पानी देते हैं, कहते हैं तुम्हें पानी देने वाला कोई नहीं बचेगा, मतलब तुम्हारी डायनेस्टी खत्म हो जाएगी। तो वाटर टाइटल के अर्थ में दोनों पानी है, जल और पानी दोनों, या सिर्फ पवित्र जल की तरफ आपका निर्देशन है कि आप जो सोचती हैं वाटर तो ये गंगा जल, पवित्र जल, तीर्थों का जल है, या पानी इन होल?
पहले अगर आपने ये बात दीपा मेहता से की होती तो वो बेहोश हो जाती हैं, क्योंकि उनको पता ही नहीं था कि इतनी सारी मीनिंग्स उनके टाइटल में निकल कर आएंगी। लेकिन दरअसल तो पानी का जो बहाव है, जो कंटिन्यूअस है, उसके ऊपर आधारित है वाटर।
जीवन का प्रवाह,
जीवन का प्रवाह, it's that aspect of water. And so it's very strange, because there were some people who were saying, why is the film called Water? We find it very objectionable that you should call the great pure Ganga just water. What does it mean? What should we call it? Sky? What is their objection? Really, one couldn't follow. But in the film, the term water is not referred specifically to the river Ganges, but it is to the whole flow of life.
दूसरा क्वेश्चन मेरा ये है मैडम, ये मैं अंग्रेजी में पूछूंगी ताकि सब लोग समझ सकें। Do you think that one day you will leave completely the role in the cinema and film, and you will decide to devote all your time and energy, I say Shakti, in the field of politics?
I am deeply aware of the fact that even the strength that I have as a parliamentarian and any kind of influence that I have comes from the fact that people respect the work that I've done as an actor. And it is a strength I wouldn't want to give away firstly, acting is something that I derive great pleasure from today. And acting gives me the kind of high profile where the issues that I take up then get special attention. So I would never want to give up the advantage of acting. A, because I find it very challenging and stimulating, and B, because I also find it as a means to an end to highlight issues that I'm interested in. Cinema has a very strong sphere of influence in a country like India. And if through the cinema I can raise issues that I'm concerned about, I would like to continue to do so. And secondly, I think I have a long way to go as an actor. I think there are still many, many fields that are unexplored, and I would like to do all of that. So I don't look at it as an either-or situation. I don't think of it as either I can do political work or I can do acting. My acting also becomes a symbol of my political statements.
One another question. As whenever I see your films, I think all agree with me. When you play, we feel that you feel the personality, you feel the angvas, the pida, dard of this personality, and आप उस जिंदगी को जीती हैं और उसमें डूब जाती हैं, ये देखने वालों को महसूस होता है। तो चूंकि आपने औरत के जीवन को अंदर से छिपकर घुसकर समझने की कोशिश की है, तो उससे संबंधित है ये प्रश्न कि आई हैव सीन योर फिल्म आज का रामावतार with Rajesh Khanna, in which you are playing Sushma's role. If one day this sweet, bold and courageous Sushma becomes woman welfare minister, then in order to improve women's situation in India, which problems should be her priorities?
Development issues. The fact that until and unless women become the center of development issues in a country like India, there can be no paradigm of progress in a country, because truly, in fact, I think the women's movement has been successful in India because rather than rally around individual rights, as the West tends to do, the Indian women's movement have rallied around development issues, which is access to education, access to basic health, access to employment opportunities, and what have you, and to make women an active participant in the development process rather than a passive recipient. Of course, my concerns are education, literacy. But the one area that is very sadly neglected when it comes to women's issues is access to basic health care. Firstly, health is not an emotive issue in India. Nobody bothers about health. And within that, women's health is not addressed at all. Now, it is extremely alarming that experts have calculated that 70% of deaths that occur due to pregnancy-related issues in India are entirely preventable. 70% is a very, very high figure. You have more women dying of pregnancy-related causes in 1 week in India than in all of Europe in a whole year. And these are entirely preventable. I mean, you can just give iron tablets and you can control anemia, and things can be made available. So it's really access to health that is my primary concern as far as women are concerned. And I think we have all these wrong notions of, oh, we have to send up primary health centers, we have to set up hospitals. What you really need to do is to provide sanitation, clean drinking water, clear the air, and you will be able to control. You know, so the understanding of health is somehow building up of primary health centers, and that's not it. It's access to basic health care and basic sanitation. And if you can look after that, a lot of people will be immune from disease. So it's a whole mindset that has to be changed when it comes to basic health care of developing nations, in particularly India. And I think if that one aspect is looked at, because with that is also malnutrition. I mean, you know that we have mindset changes which need to occur, because girl children are subjected to deprivation from the word go, from the time they are born. I mean, the male children get better food to eat. The male children get more educational opportunities. The male children get preferential treatment. And that comes from this Indian concept of the male child will look after the parents. But increasingly it is becoming evident that in today's world, it's the daughter who's looking after her parents much more than male children. And so that's why we need to see a reflection of this change.
इसी से related कुछ दूसरे some other things which are social. For example, dowry system, which is becoming worse every day. Daughters' right in heritage, which is still not in common practice. Rules, law exists, but it is not in practice. Women's education, which is not yet sufficiently improved, that we have already told. Widow's situation, which is always miserable. In many cases, even the educated woman who knows that she has the right to do certain things, she cannot take advantage of it, and often she has to step back because of the weight of tradition, social pressure, and her sanskars in which she is brought up. So, do you think one day it will be possible to think and solve these type of problems also?
See, first you have to understand where this mindset occurs. And India myths have a very dominant reality in the lives of people. It's not like the Greek mythology where you know these tales of yonder that you heard and you kept away. I mean, in India, myths and the stories that form the myths and the heroes and the heroines coming out of myths have a very living reality. And so you have Sita as this quietly acquiescing to her husband's desire, coupled with Manu's laws, which then says that a woman doesn't desire freedom and that she must be understood in terms of her relationship to her husband and her brother and her father. And then these get perpetuated and we form our heroes and our heroines and our aspirations from these people. And then popular cinema then reinforces all these myths. So there's a whole mindset change that needs to occur. And yes, and it is a four-pronged attack. You have to do it in different ways. And the problem of dowry comes from unequal inheritance laws. If we had equality in inheritance rights, then the parents wouldn't have to keep this money away for dowry. And dowry actually started as a practice that because there were unequal laws of inheritance, this was the way of ensuring that the daughter would get some part of her right. And that was given to create autonomy for the daughter so that she would have some part of money which would be her own and which wasn't from the husband that came to her, so that she felt protected. But then over the years it got distorted. And then it was from Stridhan, it became now about the money that was going to be asked of the family. There is a pressure to keep the marriage alive under all circumstances in India that leads to a lot of violence being tolerated. Because if you see, the daughter can be subjected to a slap by her husband, and she comes back to her parents and she says, my husband slapped me. And instead of removing the daughter from that home, the parents say, oh, he's a husband, he must have been in a bad mood, never mind, and forces the daughter to go back to a violent situation. Now, our dowry death occurs as the final act of violence that can occur in a whole series of violence against the women. And I believe that violence against women has the tacit approval of society all over the world. A woman is beaten up every 6 minutes in America. So it's true of the Western countries as well. Violence against women really has the tacit approval of society, and this must change. And obviously this is what the women's movement is trying to do. And I think within Indian society, the fact that we have a mindset which says ke doli jayegi to arthi wapas aayegi, you know, that needs to change. And parents must accept responsibility towards their daughters just as much they do towards their sons, so that the first indication of a violent situation, the parents must say, no violence against my daughter is ever going to be tolerated, and I'm going to pull her out, and that I continue to support her if she is in this potentially violent situation, rather than say, you've got married and we wash our hands off you and now it's for your in-laws family to look after you. That's wrong. You have to say that the parents must continue to provide a support structure. Now, it's easier said than done, because there are lots of complications, because in our society, if a girl comes back from her marriage, she jeopardizes the chances of her younger daughter, of her younger sister getting married. It's a very strange way where you punish the victim, and the man is left scot-free to get married maybe another time. And in the absence of state support, where does a woman go? Very rarely is she independent, economically independent. There is no state support. There is no system of creche for the child. So where does she go? She has no choice. She can't go back to her parents because she feels she jeopardizes her younger sister's marriage. And so oftentimes she goes back to that same violent situation. And I think parents' primary duty is to say that they do not wash their hands off her daughter when she gets married.
We've got a few last questions about about cinema itself. Janice.
Yes. Which kind of cinema, either commercial or art movies, do you think is the best way to defend women's rights in India?
See, commercial cinema is very simplistic. It whitewashes the details. It caters to the lowest common denominator and sort of just takes broad flex, you know, doesn't deal with the subject in its complexity, because its attempt is to cater to the largest common denominator. Art cinema takes a narrower look, a more realistic look. But the fact is that art cinema has a much smaller reach. So if you significantly want to make a difference in the lives of women, you must attempt to do it through commercial mainstream cinema, because that is the cinema people are watching. And if you only do it through the art cinema, then you're preaching to the already converted. So it serves a much narrower purpose. I don't think it's an either-or. I think both cinemas should reflect the rights of women. And you know, it's not just a simple thing about political rights or about rights. It's a more complex view, because particularly in the West, I think the question of rights has become so important that we've forgotten that along with rights must come responsibility. So it cannot be only about my right, my right. I also owe a responsibility to you. And I think Indian society is trying to balance all of that. To me, more important than the issue of merely rights is the gaze, is the feminine gaze. You know, it's the way of looking at situations, at their complexities, in trying to reach a broader, closer understanding, and doing it through a feminine gaze, because I think that men and women think differently. And I'm not saying better or worse, I think they think differently, and this difference must be included. Because for far too long we've been looking at the male gaze, at the male viewpoint, particularly when it comes to cinema. And I don't think that the feminine gaze will only come from women. It can also come from male directors, depending on whether the yin and the yang is balanced within them. But for a true artist, it's very important to be part male and part female, because that's the reality of the world.
I mean, in one of your films, next films, what would you like to show? What would be the message that you would like to give to the people?
you know, my real concern about India is that her pluralistic character is under attack, and there is an attempt to impose a monolithic view of what is acceptable as Indian. And that is something I want to resist completely and totally, because I believe that India's greatest strength is her plurality, her pluralism, her composite culture, her diversity. Her greatest strength is her resilience and her diversity. And that must be protected under attacks from fundamentalism of all hues. And that's what I'd like to say, even through my films. Okay, thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Oh, then an actress testimony. It's really about India, and I mean, we are so happy on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Moi, c'est mon égal. Non, mais là, c'est parti, waouh.
Écoutez, vous avez très bien fait. Parce que